So let's talk about an important aspect of our approach, which is the negativity bias, or as I like to call, your bad news brain. So this is what I call a positive birth exercise, and it's something that you'll do throughout your pregnancy. This exercise will help you understand more about the brain and how it can work against us, especially in pregnancy, and how you can make it work for you during labor. So we have this default setting in the brain. It's like the factory settings on your phone, and it's called a negativity bias. And it puts the brain on high alert for threats. You're going to learn what the negativity bias is and how to override it on the big day for a positive birth. You're going to learn how you can begin to consciously shift your focus away from the kind of birth that you don't want, instead towards the kind of birth that you do want. And this exercise starts to gently shift your mindset into reconsidering and reperceiving labor and how it can be something that is really positive. We're going to challenge that negativity bias. Now, when the brain perceives a negative experience, a threat, whether it's real or imagined, that's like Velcro to the brain. It's much easier for the brain to take that on board, and it's really sticky. And the brain looks for matching data. So think of the brain as a pattern matching machine. So when you've been mentally rehearsing the kind of birth that you don't want, it's so easy for the brain to take on more negative imagery because the brain associates this negative imagery with birth and with survival. So it thinks it's a threat. But the positive experiences and positive imageries, we have to work a little harder with that. We have to literally milk it to make it stick. We call that birth basking. So the brain just doesn't pay attention to positive experiences or imagery as much. That's why part of your ongoing homework is to start visualizing, that's mentally rehearsing your baby's birth as if it's already happened. Because the brain can't tell the difference between something you're vividly imagining or something that's actually happening. So the negativity bias is our tendency for the brain not only to register negative words or images more readily, but also to dwell on those events. For example, you might have had a really great day at work, but late in the afternoon, a coworker makes an offhand comment that really annoys you. You find yourself thinking about it all the way home. And when you get home and your partner asks, "How was your day?" you say, "Awful." The brain is totally focused on the one negative event in that full day and has dismissed all the good stuff. Our tendency to pay more attention to bad things and overlook good things is considered an evolutionary change in the brain. A few thousand years ago, paying attention to bad or dangerous or negative threats in the world was literally a matter of life and death. Those who paid more attention to the bad things around them were just more likely to survive. That also meant they were also more likely to pass on those genes that made them more attentive to danger and threat. The brain is just trying to keep you safe. But in the modern world, that causes a lot of unnecessary stress and makes us focus on possible threats instead of what's actually going on in this moment. And as you're watching this video, I would guess that there's probably a lot going right for you at the moment. So let's have a look at how we can become aware of this negativity bias and then give you some hacks to override it. So I'm sure you're already very familiar with the kind of birth that you don't want. You probably play that mental movie a few times a week, or maybe even daily, depending on how much practice you're doing with the Gentle Birth app and how stressed you are about your upcoming birth. Be sure to check out the video, "How do I know I'm practicing enough?" later on in the course. So don't misunderstand me. I'm not suggesting that you're lying on the couch visualizing every negative thing that could possibly happen during labor. Hopefully not. But how often do you find yourself thinking, I really don't want to have an emergency cesarean. I'm really petrified about tearing. Or will I feel out of control like they do in the movies? The brain is responding to that mental imagery. So each moment that you spend focused on what you don't want to have happen, stress hormones are being released. Those neural pathways in the brain are well established, but they're the neural pathways of birth gone wrong. And just like a record, if you can remember those grooves are well established in the brain. The brain believes those images are just exactly what birth is about: fear, stress, tearing, unbelievable pain. So in pregnancy, you have to intentionally retrain your focus to positive imagery. So you're giving your brain a novel experience to focus on. And the brain really likes novel experiences, again, whether they are real or imagined, and especially when they're accompanied by strong emotions. So learning about this negativity bias helps you to notice those patterns of thought and makes the initial part of this exercise a little bit harder, because those neural pathways likely don't exist in your brain yet. I bet you didn't realize this was also a build your brain class. So oftentimes in class, when I ask parents if they practice visualization, 1 or 2 hands will tentatively go up because it's assumed to be some kind of new age practice. But then I'll ask, how many of you worry? And of course, every hand in the room goes up. So you're already experts in visualization, just the wrong kind. So if you could write your birth story now, as if it's already happened, what would that look like for you? So you're already very familiar, very well versed in kind of birth that you don't want. So what would it look like if it happened exactly as you'd like it to happen? So 100,000 years ago, when you were going hunting for dinner, if you heard a rustling in the bushes, you'd automatically think tiger instead of hamster, because this negativity bias is a protective mechanism. And it follows the news headlines. There's a saying in the media, if it bleeds, it leads. Oftentimes when you look at anything on the news, it's generally worst case scenario, lots of drama. And that really excites the negativity bias that we have. So part of this exercise is to start retraining yourself to look at birth in a different way, to reframe and reperceive birth compared to what you've probably been practicing quite a bit. You're really good at practicing what you don't want in labor. So this is where we start turning this ship around. So over the coming weeks, you're going to refocus and start rebuilding those new networks in the brain. It's estimated that we have around 30 to 40,000 thoughts going through our heads every day. We can't all of a sudden become the thought police and start monitoring every little thought you have about labor. I find it much easier if you start to tune into your gut feeling. It's not difficult to notice stress hormones in your body because your heart rate increases, you might feel a bit nervous, maybe butterflies, maybe even feeling a bit sick. So you're going to start to be more conscious about what you're focused on. You know the acronym WTF? Well, in gentle birth, we say, where's the focus? In pregnancy, I'm sure you're probably really, really careful about watching what you put into your body. But you're probably not as careful about what's going on up here in the mind, which has an incredible effect on the body. So if you hear someone on TV or on the news, or maybe a friend that wants to tell you this really difficult birth story, you have to change the channel. Literally change the channel, change the topic, so that we're not constantly activating these neural pathways. This isn't a once-off activity. You have to refocus again and again during your pregnancy, so that in labor, your brain has a completely different template to work from, one that it associates with excitement and empowerment and confidence. In the beginning, this can feel like a little bit more work because you're literally carving a new pathway in the jungle of your mind. If you think about it, let's say we're trying to get through the jungle to go to a village across the hill. The first time you make your way through that path, you have your machete in your hand and you've got to clear that pathway. But then you come back a few days later and it's starting to overgrow a little bit more, but you can still make out where the path is. And the more often you use that pathway, the quicker it becomes this little road and then a big freeway. So positive thoughts about birth start to become new automatic behaviors. That whole bad birth neural pathway then starts to wither away because there's no activity in these neurons anymore or has been reduced significantly. So the gentle birth approach includes this intentional activity. Think of it like creating your new mind movie of your birth. It's intentional because we want to build out these pathways that are going to make this experience much more positive for you, no matter how things happen on the day. So let's just say you are writing your birth story now as if it's already happened, and it was the most incredible experience that you could have hoped for. Your baby is healthy and you are healthy. So let's start with our baseline, healthy mom and baby. What else would make it an amazing experience for you? If you could close your eyes now and think about, oh, what would that be like? Wouldn't that be amazing? What is that for you? Now, it can be in a room with 10 obstetricians or a home birth at home with your midwife. It can be out in the Pacific Ocean with dolphins. This is your birth fantasy, but it just has to make you feel good. So we want to associate those positive emotions. So if, for example, Aladdin came out of the lamp right now and said, I'll grant you the most amazing birth experience possible. It can be as long or as short, at home, a birth center. What would it be for you? So right now, I want you to pause the video and jot down some words that come to mind. Now, it might take a minute or two to really get into the flow of doing this exercise, because for most of you watching this video, you're not used to thinking about labor going really well. So those neural pathways aren't built out yet. That's why it's going to take a few moments to come up with, well, what would it look like? So take a moment, pause the video, and come back when you're finished. Okay, welcome back. So I bet you've probably never thought about birth in this way, or at least not as frequently as you should be. And this is one of the reasons why this exercise is so interesting, because it's almost as if we won't let ourselves think about how good it could be. It's almost like we say to ourselves, well, if I just think about the negative stuff and watch those scary YouTube videos, then I'll be prepared if something like that happens. And I get it. You probably don't know many people who've had amazing birth experiences, especially first-time parents. But trust me, they happen every day. A really important aspect of this exercise is that we're not being unrealistic here. This is not about being Pollyanna and pretending that unexpected stuff doesn't happen. Of course it does. But the fact is, the vast majority of people who have the right support, are in the right place, will have very straightforward, normal, healthy births. And we call this the practice of intelligent optimism. Of course, we recognize that, yes, stuff happens, but we're not going to spend the next 6 weeks or 6 months focusing on the stuff that might go wrong, especially if you're having a healthy, well pregnancy. We're going to shelve those unnecessary stressors. Your daily training is preparing you to handle whatever comes your way on the day and after. And when I talk about something unexpected coming out of left field, most parents' minds tend to go to, an unplanned cesarean, or an instrumental birth almost immediately. But as you'll see in the many, many birth stories along this spectrum, it also includes having the mental stability and emotional regulation to cope with an unplanned birth in the car or an unexpected fast birth at home. So for anyone who's married or planning a wedding, imagine if the minute you announced your engagement, all people wanted to tell you was all the stuff that can go wrong on your wedding day. And you then spent your entire engagement imagining all kinds of awful things that could happen. Well, you'd probably be pretty quick to find new friends, and those thoughts would probably feel quite alien to you. Yet, we think it's okay to mentally prepare in that way for birth. Now, that's not to say you didn't have contingency plans in case it rained on the day and you had to move your cocktail reception indoors. Again, we're back to controlling the controllables. Just like the day your baby arrives, you'll have a plan B and maybe even a plan C and D too. We'll have a flexible mindset, expecting things to go well, but also not hanging our happiness on one kind of birth. Now, it is hard to get into that headspace if you haven't experienced labour before, but I'm sure there have been other events in your life that have been stressful for you or have challenged you. And you can think about those events or those circumstances that you overcame and try to bring up that I did it feeling. If you can connect to that feeling of I did it, that will make your mental movie a lot easier for you. So try to connect with those feelings. Partners, I'm sure you're probably mentally rehearsing all kinds of amazing birth imagery, right? So what would a positive birth be for you? Feeling useful, like you could contribute to this important day in a meaningful way. And that's such a big part of our class. Feeling like you can give really meaningful support on the day, physically and psychologically. So we're covering all bases. Remember, the brain cannot tell the difference between what's vividly imagined and what's really happening right now. So yes, I know this exercise does feel a little bit forced because it's so easy for the brain to go to that worst case scenario and practicing the thoughts of what you don't want. And I shouldn't have to say this, but I will. Repeatedly imagining your baby's birth going well is not a predictor of exactly what will happen on the day. But it is a predictor of reduced stress and anxiety for the next few months. And if you're planning an unmedicated birth, mentally rehearsing scary events, what's called catastrophizing, is associated with more requests for analgesia. So Muhammad Ali used to talk about his mental rehearsal before a big fight, visualization, and he called it creating future history. So I encourage you to sit down and either write your birth story as well as imagine it. Just put it on your laptop or a couple of notes into your phone. And what will happen is you will come back to it time and time again to top it up with even more positive imagery. And that will contribute to making you feel more excited about your baby's birth. All of this mental activity and positive emotions keeps building out those neural pathways. And as those neural pathways grow, you are crowding out the neural pathways associated with that other kind of birth. When I was pregnant with Cooper and I was in college at the time, and I would get into the car, I had like a 30-minute drive, and I would imagine someone sitting in the passenger seat saying, well, how did it all go? So think it's November, it's raining, and I've got 30 minutes in the car. So I could sit and listen to music or I could mentally rehearse. So I would have this conversation of how amazing Cooper's birth was. I would talk about how excited I was and how I couldn't wait for labor to begin. And my midwife arrived at this time and it was all happening. And so by the time I would get out of the car, when I got to college, I would literally bounce out of the car. I was so excited. So it started the day off really well. And I just kept thinking, I cannot wait to do this. So not only was I feeding my brain positive imagery in the car every day, it was rewiring my brain to think very differently about my upcoming labor with Cooper.